Hello, America. This is David Kraljic from Votocracy.com. We're here today to discuss gun control. We'll discuss the facts, issues, and points of view. The goal is to provide you with the information you need to to be well informed before you place votes on Votocracy. To help us see the issues in more meaningful light, we have Professor John Olson with us. Professor Olson is an expert in criminology, constitutional law as it relates to gun matters. He's written extensively about the issues and implications on civil liberties. Hello, Professor Olson.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Glad to talk with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming on. So, in the wake of the Sandy Hook shootings, America looked to lawmakers for measures to prevent such a, tragic event from happening again. And the most recent gun legislation out of committee was S649, the Safe Communities, Safe Schools Act. Although it was effectively voted down, all the amendments were voted down, or majority of them, we don't think that it's the end of the story. There'll be plenty more activity and potentially more legislation proposed. And to start the discussion, in this case, we have the luxury of using the amendments as points of discussion. So unless you want to discuss the email you sent earlier today.
Well, actually, I think before talking about the particular legislation that failed, we should talk about the actual factual environment in which Congress is acting. Now, Congress largely acts on the basis of emotions rather than facts, but we all like to think that we are factually oriented people and we make decisions on the basis of fact. Essentially what's happened, on May 7th, the Department of Justice's Bureau of Criminal Statistics, the top organization for statistics in these areas, came out with some dramatic news with respect to firearms and crime in America. Essentially saying that from 1993 through 2011, there had been a dramatic decrease in firearms use in crime. For example, firearm-related homicides are down 40%, but a more important number is the number of non-fatal firearms crimes, which are down by 70%. 70%.
Wow. That's incredible. So, and that's since when?
That's since 1993.
Huh, okay.
With no significant new laws. I mean, we have the Brady bill. And we had for a while the assault weapons ban,
right,
which was finally allowed to lapse because it wasn't doing anything. I mean, it was creating a tremendous amount of harassment for law-abiding citizens who wanted modern, technologically advanced firearms, but it was causing absolutely no drop of any significance in crime. So Congress let that drop. The Bureau of Justice Statistics came out with some more information that's sort of radical. Fewer than 1% of state prison inmates possessed a gun that they obtained at a gun show.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's consistent with the FBI's data, which says that it's about 0.7%. That's less than 1% who acquire their firearms at gun shows. Now, why is this the case? Because all of these people are hooked up with the criminal network in America. And the drug network and the illegal sale of firearms networks are completely integrated. So that, if you can buy a gram or two of cocaine you can buy a gun from the same person because firearms are used as cash in drug transactions. It's a whole lot easier to simply roll out of bed at 6 p.m., go behind the bar on 5th Street where the cocaine seller hangs out, and say, I need some cocaine, and by the way, I'd also like a gun, preferably loaded.
Right.
And they will sell you both. So that is a marketplace that the Brady Bill can't touch. That is a marketplace that background checks can't touch. And that is the marketplace from which guns used in crime come.
Right. Right.
These are actual statistics. They're not somebody's hope that, oh my God, if we take away Joe Olson's guns, we'll stop crime. No, we won't. The markets are completely separate. And this drop, amazingly, there's been an amazing drop in murders and injuries from firearms. As I said, homicides are down 40%. Injuries from firearms are down, in crime are down 70%. It also applies in schools. So we have in America about 11,000 murders a year. These are murders. I'm not confounding accidents or anything or suicides. I'm talking about murders.
Right.
And of those murders, about 10,500 of them, that is virtually all of them, are committed by criminals against other criminals. It was interesting. They paid some Harvard professors to come into Minneapolis. They didn't pay me, but they paid some guys from Harvard to come in and tell them the same thing. They looked at homicides in Minneapolis. Well, the perpetrators, on average, had 7.3 prior arrests.
Right.
The victims, on average, had 7.4 prior arrests.
So the majority of it is criminals killing criminals.
Correct. And, if you're not buying, selling, or transporting cocaine at 3 a.m. In very specific neighborhoods, you're perfectly safe.
Right. So in the grand scheme of things, and I'll say this with some sensitivity to, the tragic situations that happen like Sandy Hook, but in the grand scheme of things, the actual numbers of deaths caused by guns is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction.
That don't affect criminals. Yes, it is an extraordinarily small number.
Right. And so, as an average American, as I call myself, one who doesn't pay attention to the stats as you've outlined them, on my daily life.
Right.
And I hear a tragedy like Sandy Hook, I must admit that I get into a mode where I think, oh, wow, we got to do something about this. And, naturally then senators and representatives take action and, that sort of thing happens.
Right.
But if you step back and, listen to the stats that you just described, putting laws in place that attack or try to address such a small percentage, no matter how tragic, on the flip side, they limit, civil liberties, gun control, your right to bear arms, and those sorts of things.
Right.
It's potentially ill-placed.
Well, we wouldn't do this in any other aspect of life. I mean, 500 deaths a year does not move legislators or congressmen in the ordinary course of events.
Right.
The costs of attempting to reduce 500 to 490 is just completely out of the ballpark.
Right.
And what we have here really is two groups. We have the criminal class, who do probably 98% of the murders. And those people are in it for money. They possess guns because they assist their criminal activities. and virtually all of the mayhem that they cause is within their own small group. There are another group that is the deaths that are caused by people who have significant mental health problems.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The problem with people who have significant mental health problems is, well, for 4 years, my mother, who's now deceased, was on Prozac.
Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry, Professor, just as a way to kind of pinpoint that group, what is the count, I guess, for deaths caused by that group?
Deaths caused by that group, probably less than 200, but certainly less than 500.
Right. So it's still a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction.
It's a very tiny, and in fact, gun injuries in school have been dropping dramatically,
mm-hmm.
as this Department of Justice report indicates.
Right.
They happen, however, to be, tragedies. Well, that's where schools are where we have tragedies,
right,
like we had at Newtown, for two reasons. One, we have mentally ill people who want their 15 seconds of fame. And they have decided that they're never going to be a rocket scientist, they're never going to be a congressman, they're not going to get on television any other way. In fact, I understand that they believe from some of his writings that the young man in Newtown was motivated to exceed the total that the young man in Norway got.
Wow.
In fact, the largest school shootings have been in France, Germany, and Norway, all of which have very significant and very, very strict gun laws. Gun laws regulate the activities of 80 million Americans.
Right.
When the problem is 500.
Right.
Or 5,000. Let's assume it's 5,000. There's 10 to 1 potential mental health, people with mental health problems that are going to lead to homicide.
Yeah.
But there's still 30 million people on the other side. The difficulty that Congress is running into is when you accuse 30 million people of causing all of this mayhem in society and they know they haven't done it, they get very unhappy.
Right.
Because you are personally attacking them, you are saying to them and to the rest of America that Joe Olson, who is in 68 years of life, never been touched by a police officer, and had a top secret clearance in the military, that Joe Olson can't be trusted.
Yeah.
And, I react very strongly negatively to that, and so do the other 80 million gun owners in America. And that's what Congress heard from. That's what the Minnesota legislature heard from in the last session. And one of the things that hearings do, if you actually have them, and anyone listens, is you get the facts out.
Right.
So the situation is we need to have a better system for identifying those people who are likely to cause mayhem because of their mental illness. That's a problem for the psychiatrist.
Yeah, so on that topic, I believe there was some amendments in S649 that were attempting to address that, at least with some, programs or funding for mental health programs.
Yes, and that amendment should have passed. It didn't, but it should have.
Right. Right, that's interesting.
Well, it's like in Minnesota. I mean, in 2009, Congress passed the NICS Improvement Act to make the federal background system more more workable, to get more information into it. And they put federal bucks on it. Well, in Minnesota, the Department of Public Safety brought a bill to the legislature to meet the requirements that Congress had set forth and get this federal money. The problem is that they wrote a bill that the feds won't accept. Mm-hmm. So here we are. It's 4 years later. We still haven't got the federal money. We, that is the pro-gun people, wrote an amendment that exactly copied the language from Iowa. Mm-hmm. Now, did we do that? Because the FBI has recognized the language from Iowa works, and they've gotten their federal funding.
Mm-hmm. So let me stop you there. I'm sorry. Just to be clear, that you mentioned you are what you would consider pro-gun.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. It's just fair to say it that way.
I can make the arguments on both sides,
right?
And I do in my seminar, but there's no question where I come from.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But the point is, we had a bill in the Minnesota legislature that would have gotten those federal dollars,
right.
And there's so much fear and mistrust that it wasn't passed.
Huh. Okay.
Somebody said, my God, you've made a change in Minnesota law. Well, yes, because if we don't make a change in Minnesota law, you can't get the money.
Right. And so can you describe, it sounds like you said the Iowa
language works.
Right. And so could you describe that a bit? Because, it seems like if it works, then why not use it as a model everywhere else?
Well, what happened in 2009 was Congress laid out a number of conditions that had to be met. In other words, the main thing they were trying to do was ensure that every state had a system that allowed people who had been disqualified from owning firearms because of mental health problems, mm-hmm. to go through a judicial process and get their rights back. Because in a number of states, a 72-hour hold for observation triggers the loss of firearms rights. And if it triggers the federal provisions, which are different from the state provisions, if it triggers the federal provisions, they last forever. So you have to have some way of going into the state where you were originally committed and getting uncommitted.
Right.
And many states didn't have any procedure for that. Because in general, it doesn't matter because there isn't a lifetime prohibition at the state level, but there is at the federal level. So in order to make those consistent, Congress said every state they can't make states do things.
Right.
Under the 10th Amendment. So they dangled some money out there, and they said, here's the money. If you provide a judicial restoration procedure that meets these requirements, then we'll give you all this federal money to report all these mental health commitments to the NICS system.
Mm-hmm.
Because a major problem with the NICS system, as we saw in Newtown, is that the mental health reporting side of it is really in its infancy. Most states don't even know themselves who's been committed.
Right. Huh. Okay. So, while it may not be as popular for a senator to propose a fix to the NICS system that would, address the issue you're describing, it sounds like it may be the better way to go. Versus saying we're going to do something to control guns.
No, I once did a test. I don't have children in my house, so I could do it at home. I took 2 identical pistols.
Mm-hmm.
I loaded both of them. No, actually, I loaded one and I didn't load the other, and I put them on bookshelves. And I watched them month after month after month. And they got dustier and dustier and dustier. But neither one of them engaged in any misconduct.
Okay.
Because you need one of these. Let me get that in the picture.
Yeah.
You need a human hand in order for there to be any kind of disaster caused by a firearm. And if we don't focus on the human element, we will never achieve anything, which is why when you ask criminologists whether gun laws work, there have been 18 studies by people from all over the political spectrum, and they've all come down to the same answer. They don't reduce crime.
Right. Right. Well,
And they don't impact people with mental health because the people with mental health aren't in the system.
yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. This is fantastic. It's amazing, to hear it this way. As I said in the beginning of the interview, that we had planned to go through the amendments, although, given the bigger picture conversation that we just had, I'm not sure that we actually need to. Although, there are a couple of them that maybe we could just skim over because...
Well, I'd like to do that, actually.
Yeah.
The one is the Manchin-Toomey Amendment.
Right.
A great many people are fooled because there's language in it that says the FBI will not keep a record of the NICS check, which is the National Criminal Information System, the actual background check.
Right.
The FBI will not do that. But what is in the background of the Manchin-Toomey bill is that in order to use the NICS system, you have to go through a firearms dealer, and the ATF requires the firearms dealer cannot run a background check unless he takes the gun into his inventory. So the transfer is actually made from the dealer to the buyer. That results in a federal form called a 4473, and those are kept forever.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And those ultimately find their way to the ATF, who has a center in, I think it's Neely, West Virginia, where they're all scanned. And so what we have is the entire form scanned.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The data on the top of it, which says name, address, etc., is put in one place and separated from the make, model, and serial number on the gun. Because if they were together, we'd have a registration system. So what they do is they keep them in two separate places. Now, what's the difference between those two? $50,000 worth of programming.
Right.
And the government has at least a 50% accurate national registration system.
Right.
So gun owners are not nuts. They actually understand the interplay of federal and state law, and they know that when you say the FBI isn't going to keep the NICS check, but you're required to fill out a 4473, that the congressman who's talking to you is trying to dupe you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I think that's why Manchin-Toomey, the amendment, lost, and I think that's why Senator Manchin is going to lose his next election.
Right.
He tried to dupe the people of West Virginia, and that's not going to work.
Okay.
Now, the other bill that was in there was the old assault weapons thing. Firearms are firearms are firearms. The number of rifles of all types used to commit homicides annually is about 2.5%.
Okay. Well,
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 instances. That's not much. And the assault weapons bill is all about, let me see if I can get this up here. It's all about cosmetics. This is a flash hider. Now you'll notice that the hole goes all the way through. That's because the person who's being shot, who's at the other end of the flash hider, can see the flash this big and as bright as the daylight will allow.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What the flash hider does, though, is it breaks up for the person holding the gun, it breaks up the flash and disperses it out to the side. Now, this is important if you're hunting deer early in the morning or you're hunting deer late at night, because it often takes 2 shots to get a humane kill. And you don't want to be blinded,
okay,
unable to see the sights, and unable to do what you need to do to be a humane hunter. It doesn't make the gun any more lethal.
Okay, so this is a great example of how, again, the average person doesn't consider or know or wouldn't even think of these sorts of things. When I hear assault weapons, I just automatically assume that it has more to do with
magic,
their power, their the amount of shots they can fire, at what speed, versus the detail that you just described about the flashes coming out of the front of the gun.
Right. I mean, it's all cosmetics. Matter of fact, I have two rifles. It's a Ruger Mini 14. I have one of them that has all the plastic and all the bad stuff on it. I have another one that has a walnut stock and looks like your grandfather's deer rifle. And in 4 minutes, I can change one into the other.
Right. 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 Yeah. Well, I myself don't own a gun.
Sure.
I have never shot a gun. I don't know anything about them. I can't imagine a reason to have one. But at the same time, this is America, and you should be able to decide if you want one and have them. And I can't find a reason based on the statistics to, me personally decide to limit someone's right to have one.
No, because of those 80 million people who lawfully own firearms,
right.
Essentially none of them will ever misuse them. The firearms are misused by people who don't lawfully own them because they're already criminals and they're prohibited from owning them. And they're owned by people who have severe mental illness problems, who, if the mental health system was properly identifying and reporting, would be prohibited as well.
Right.
So you're dealing with 80 million people who are completely innocent.
Yeah. So are you aware of any current legislation, introduced in the current session of Congress that addresses the mental health side and potentially even the NICS system's shortcomings with mental health?
Oh yes, there are bills. There was one of the amendments that you mentioned earlier that went down to defeat. And there are other amendments having to do with veterans and mental health problems. It essentially veterans who have problems with post-traumatic stress syndrome, have depression when they come back to the States, get on a list which the Veterans Administration gives to the FBI. And if you ask for any help at all in managing your affairs, you're deemed to be permanently prohibited from owning a firearm. Now, since this is done at the federal system, you have to have a federal remedy to it, and Congress hasn't seen fit to provide one. Remember, in 2009, they made the states do it.
Right.
But Congress won't do it. They won't make the federal government do it.
Right. Well, so yeah, one of the amendments, as I understood it, was the veteran gun rights, and they sought to expand the rights for veterans and their families.
Right. They're seeking to give them the same rights restoration
as the states got in 2009.
That Congress forced the states to do in 2009.
Right.
I mean, now it's insane that Congress will make the states do something, and then they won't make the federal government do the same thing.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, I feel that I have a much better grasp, certainly of the big picture, like we led the conversation off with today, and even the details of the workings of the registration system, and everything I think I would need to make a decision for myself personally. So.
Well, I hope I've been helpful to the people who watch your program.
Yeah, I think you have greatly. You've certainly been helpful to me, and as you know, on Votocracy, we post the bills so that Americans can vote on them, and then we end up sending those votes to your specific senators and representatives, and then track them, over a longer period of time, so we can compare outcomes of the votes placed by Americans versus the congressional votes.
That's good service.
Yeah, we're working hard on it. We think it's going to be a tremendously valuable tool. The thing that we've heard over and over again is, the bills are pretty complicated. So without someone like you to describe them, an expert, it's hard for the average person to really make an informed decision. They're just kind of clicking yes or no and not really knowing the story behind the scenes. So thank you for providing.
And the way the feds write their legislation, which is they change a word here and they change a word there, but they don't give you any context, makes reading a federal bill very difficult because you have to have the statute right next to you and you have to be able to I always use Xerox copies because I have to be able to write in the changes.
Right.
Whereas in many states, the bills are come with stuff crossed out and stuff underlined that's being added, and you can see the entire context.
Right.
So federal legislation is extraordinarily difficult for even lawyers, much less normal people, to understand at all.
Right. Well, I've been now doing this for a few years, and I certainly have tried very, very hard. And I'm not a lawyer, So yeah, I can appreciate how difficult it is.
Well, I'm glad I was able to provide some assistance, and thank you for calling on me.
All right, thank you for coming on, and have a great day.
Same to you.
Okay, take care. Bye.